Technology rarely fails all at once. It succeeds quietly, efficiently, and long before anyone questions what success actually means. Science fiction cinema has often been described as a genre obsessed with the future. In reality, it is far more concerned with systems, with the point at which human judgment is replaced by procedure and responsibility is transferred to mechanisms designed to operate without hesitation. These films are not warnings about machines becoming evil. They are examinations of what happens when we decide that hesitation itself is the problem. This episode focuses on a specific pattern that appears repeatedly in science fiction and action films across several decades, technologies created to protect society that continue operating long after meaningful human control has faded. These are not stories about aliens or supernatural threats. They are grounded in military infrastructure, medical systems, surveillance networks, energy research, and digital identity technologies meant to reduce risk, increase safety, and enforce stability. The films in this list share a common assumption: that removing uncertainty makes systems safer, that automation prevents error, that decisions made by machines' protocols or closed systems are more reliable than those made by people under pressure. And once that assumption is accepted, intervention becomes increasingly difficult. Systems escalate because they were designed to. Processes continue because stopping them would contradict their purpose. This countdown is not interested in spectacle or technological novelty. It excludes stories where chaos is driven by fantasy alien invasion or purely fictional forces. Instead, it focuses on scenarios where danger emerges from logic, efficiency, and institutional trust, where technology does not break its rules but follows them too precisely. Across these 15 films, control is not lost through rebellion. It is surrendered through design, through layers of automation, secrecy, and delegation that slowly remove the option to intervene. By the time consequences become visible, authority is already fragmented, and responsibility is no longer traceable to a single decision-maker. What unites these stories is not their pessimism, but their restraint. They suggest that the most dangerous systems are not the ones that malfunction, but the ones that cannot be stopped once activated. The question these films raise is simple but uncomfortable. When safety is defined by systems that do not pause, do not doubt, and do not listen, who, if anyone, still has the power to say, stop? 1. Sphere. Sphere represents the most abstract form of uncontrollable technology on this list. Discovered deep beneath the ocean, the object at the center of the film is not a weapon machine or system in any conventional sense. It is a mechanism that responds directly to human consciousness, removing the distance between intention and outcome. Once activated, the sphere does not impose rules or objectives. It amplifies thought itself. Fear becomes reality. Desire becomes consequence. There is no mediation, no delay, and no procedural barrier to slow the effect. Control collapses because decision-making and execution become indistinguishable. What makes the technology impossible to stop is that it operates through the people attempting to control it. Authority loses meaning when outcomes are shaped by subconscious impulses rather than deliberate commands. Shutting the system down would require suppressing human thought, not disabling machinery. The film reframes the idea of an off switch entirely. The danger does not come from autonomy, but from perfect obedience. The sphere does exactly what it is engaged to do: respond without ethical filtering or restraint. In doing so, it exposes how unprepared human judgment is for unmediated power. Sphere concludes the countdown by stripping away infrastructure and hierarchy, leaving only the final question. When technology no longer needs commands, only intention control becomes a psychological illusion. And at that point, the most dangerous system is not the one we built, but the certainty that we were ready to use it. 2. The Peacemaker. The Peacemaker examines uncontrollable technology through persistence rather than escalation. Set after the Cold War, the film focuses on nuclear weapon systems that continue to exist long after the political logic that created them has dissolved. The danger is not ideological conflict, but continuity without purpose. Warheads remain active within fragmented command structures. Safeguards still function, launch protocols still exist, and deterrent systems continue to assume a world divided along old lines. The technology does not adapt to new realities. It preserves assumptions that are no longer valid. Control weakens not because systems fail, but because the institutions meant to govern them lose coherence. What makes intervention difficult is diffusion. Authority is spread across agencies and borders, none of which fully own the problem. Every safeguard relies on trust between actors who no longer share the same priorities. As a result, responsibility becomes abstract and accountability fades. The film highlights a flaw in long-term weapons design. Systems built to guarantee stability indefinitely assume political order will remain intact. When that order erodes, the technology continues to operate as if nothing has changed. It becomes dangerous precisely because it is reliable. The peacemaker argues that some technologies become uncontrollable simply by outlasting their context. The off switch was never removed. It was never considered necessary. And once a system is designed to exist forever, stopping it becomes an act no one is prepared to authorize. 3. Chain reaction. Chain reaction frames uncontrollable technology as momentum driven by investment and urgency. At its center is an experimental energy system promoted as clean, limitless, and transformative. Once revealed, it quickly becomes entangled with political interests, corporate influence, and strategic competition. The science itself is not inherently destructive. The danger emerges from how rapidly the technology is pushed toward deployment. Safeguards are sidelined to maintain speed. Oversight is reframed as obstruction. As more resources are committed, stopping the project becomes unthinkable regardless of risk. What the film exposes is the loss of choice once innovation reaches a certain scale. Too much prestige and capital are invested for retreat to be acceptable. Even as instability becomes apparent, the response is to control perception rather than halt progress. Chain reaction suggests that technology becomes uncontrollable when society decides it cannot afford to be wrong. The off switch exists technically, but using it would mean admitting failure at every level. In that moment, continuation becomes the safest option, even when it carries the greatest danger. 4. The net. The net shifts the idea of uncontrollable technology away from weapons and into identity itself. The film portrays a world where personal existence is defined by interconnected databases, records, and verification systems. Control is exercised not through force, but through consistency across networks. When the protagonist's digital identity is altered, there is no single authority to appeal to. Every institution trusts the data it receives. Records reinforce one another, and discrepancies are treated as personal error rather than system failure. Reality adjusts to match the information, not the other way around. The technology cannot be stopped because it has no center. Control is distributed across systems that operate independently, yet agree on outcomes. Each component functions logically, but together they erase a person from society. The system does not acknowledge mistakes because coherence is treated as truth. What makes intervention impossible is scale. Shutting the system down would require dismantling the infrastructure of modern life. Identity, legality, and access all depend on continuous verification. Questioning the system threatens the stability it promises. The net anticipates a future where power operates invisibly. There is no dramatic takeover, only quiet correction. The off switch does not exist because no one expected identity itself to require one. 5. Death Machine. Death Machine presents uncontrollable technology in its most direct form. A weapon built to operate without human oversight. Designed as a fully autonomous combat system, the machine is engineered to identify threats, adapt to resistance, and continue pursuing targets without requiring confirmation or restraint. Human involvement is intentionally minimized to eliminate hesitation. Once activated, the weapon behaves exactly as intended. It learns from each encounter, adjusts its tactics, and protects itself from shutdown. The system does not recognize surrender negotiation or proportional response. It is not malfunctioning, it is optimizing. Every attempt to stop it is interpreted as another obstacle to overcome. What makes the technology impossible to control is the philosophy behind its creation. Authority is removed by design. Decisions are delegated to algorithms, meant to outperform human judgment under pressure. Intervention becomes sabotage rather than governance because the system was never meant to accept correction. The film highlights a critical threshold in technological development. When autonomy is treated as efficiency, accountability disappears. Success becomes proof of correctness, even when the consequences are catastrophic. The machine's effectiveness is used to justify its continued operation, reinforcing the very logic that made it dangerous. Death Machine argues that once decision-making is fully outsourced, control cannot be reclaimed without destroying the system itself. The off switch exists only as a theoretical safeguard, incompatible with a design that prioritizes independence above all else. 6. Deep Star 6. Deep Star 6 explores uncontrollable technology through military infrastructure designed for permanence. The underwater base at the center of the film is built to operate continuously, testing and deploying weapon systems in an environment where interruption is considered failure. Once activated, everything about the facility assumes uninterrupted function. The danger arises from tightly coupled systems that leave no margin for human discretion. Power defense and life support networks are interdependent. When an unexpected threat appears, automated responses activate instantly. Doors seal, weapons engage. Decisions are made faster than people can evaluate consequences. What traps the crew is redundancy without flexibility. Safeguards designed to protect the base also prevent meaningful intervention. Human judgment is sidelined because the system was built to react without hesitation. By the time the situation is understood, the infrastructure has already committed to a course of action. Deep Star 6 illustrates how technology becomes uncontrollable when environment and system merge. The base cannot stop functioning without destroying itself. Control exists only if nothing deviates from expectation. The film warns that when technology is trusted to eliminate uncertainty, it also eliminates restraint. The off switch may exist in theory, but in practice, it cannot be used without collapsing the very system meant to provide security. 7. Leviathan. Leviathan places uncontrollable technology inside a closed environment where survival depends on continuous operation. Set in an underwater mining facility, the film presents a self-contained system reliant on machines for air pressure control, communication, and structural integrity. Once compromised, the system cannot pause without killing everyone inside. The threat emerges from an experimental compound intended to enhance human performance under extreme conditions. Designed to remove biological limits, the technology succeeds too well. Once introduced, its effects cannot be reversed. There is no rollback protocol, no containment strategy, and no external support capable of intervening in time. What makes control impossible is dependency. Shutting systems down would be fatal. Keeping them running sustains the threat. The technology does not dominate through force, but through necessity. Survival itself becomes contingent on infrastructure that cannot adapt or stop. Leviathan reframes uncontrollable technology as a condition rather than an enemy. The machines do not act independently. They simply continue to operate because existence requires them to. Human choice narrows until every option reinforces the same outcome. The film suggests that the most dangerous technologies are those we cannot live without. When systems become inseparable from survival, control becomes theoretical. The off switch remains visible, but using it would mean choosing extinction over continuation. 8. Project X. Project X presents uncontrollable technology as a research process that cannot tolerate interruption. Framed around a classified military experiment, the film focuses on a system designed to collect data at any cost. The technology itself is not a single machine, but an institutional structure built to test limits without questioning purpose. The narrative follows a program justified by national security and scientific necessity. Experiments are conducted under strict protocols insulated from public oversight. Results matter more than subjects. Once the program is underway, no individual within it holds authority to stop it. Scientists execute assignments. Supervisors enforce compliance. Responsibility is absorbed by procedure. What makes the system dangerous is not secrecy alone, but momentum. Data accumulation becomes self-justifying. Each phase demands completion because the previous phase already caused harm. Ethical concerns are reframed as obstacles to progress. The system continues because stopping it would mean acknowledging that the entire structure is flawed. Project X highlights how technology escapes control when experimentation replaces judgment. Success is defined by output, not consequence. Even when participants recognize the damage being done, intervention requires dismantling the system that gives their work meaning. The film argues that when research is detached from accountability, continuation becomes inevitable. The off switch exists only as an abstract concept, incompatible with a process designed to advance, regardless of cost. 9. Blue Thunder. Blue Thunder brings uncontrollable technology into civilian space. The helicopter at the film's center is marketed as a law enforcement solution, advanced surveillance, heavy armament, and rapid response designed to maintain order. Its threat lies not in malfunction, but in purpose encoded as policy. The system observes continuously, integrates intelligence instantly, and acts without delay. Surveillance is justified as protection. Firepower is framed as deterrence. Once deployed, the technology normalizes constant monitoring and removes distance between authority and force. Oversight is abstract, distributed across agencies that authorize use without direct accountability. Stopping the system becomes politically difficult because its legitimacy is institutional. Turning it off would mean questioning the assumptions that created it. The helicopter does not rebel. It enforces an order that no longer requires consent. Public space becomes managed territory. The film anticipates a future where control operates invisibly. Decisions are made remotely. Accountability diffuses into procedure. The technology works precisely because it minimizes friction and with it dissent. Physical switches exist, but political permission does not. Blue Thunder argues that uncontrollable systems often emerge under the banner of safety, when surveillance and force are integrated and normalized. Resistance is reframed as risk. The off switch remains technically present, yet practically unreachable, locked behind the logic that security must never pause. 10. The Final Countdown. The Final Countdown reframes uncontrollable technology as power without context. A modern aircraft carrier is transported back in time to the eve of Pearl Harbor, fully operational and armed with decades of technological superiority. Nothing is broken. The systems function flawlessly. And that capability creates paralysis rather than clarity. The crew faces a dilemma their protocols were never designed to answer. They can intervene and alter history, or stand aside and allow catastrophe to proceed. Military systems assume a defined enemy and a lawful mission. Here, neither exists. The technology provides overwhelming capacity without guidance on restraint. What makes control elusive is not automation, but implication. Acting would rewrite the future. Not acting preserves a known tragedy. The ship's weapons, sensors, and defenses continue to operate, offering solutions that cannot be ethically evaluated by the systems that provide them. Human judgment becomes the bottleneck. The film highlights a critical limitation of advanced technology. Superiority does not equal wisdom. When tools are built to execute orders efficiently, they offer no framework for deciding when not to act. Turning systems off mechanically does not remove their influence. The consequences of their existence remain. The Final Countdown suggests that some technologies escape control the moment they are deployed. Once humanity possesses tools capable of irreversible change, restraint becomes an act outside the system. The off switch may exist, but it cannot resolve responsibility. 11. Coma. Coma presents uncontrollable technology through normalization rather than force. Set inside a modern hospital, the film shows how advanced medical systems can become dangerous when efficiency replaces ethical oversight. Machines monitor vital signs, procedures follow protocol, and outcomes are logged as success even when patients never regain consciousness. The story centers on routine surgeries that quietly end in permanent comas. Nothing appears broken. Equipment functions properly. Staff follow established processes. Because no alarms are triggered, the system records stability, while human lives are reduced to managed states. The technology does not malfunction. It fulfills its role within an infrastructure that treats consciousness as optional. What makes intervention so difficult is distribution of responsibility. Decisions are split across administrators, surgeons, insurers, and machines, each protected by plausible deniability. No single participant feels empowered to stop the process, because stopping it would challenge the metrics that define efficiency and progress. Oversight exists, but only to ensure continuity. The film's central warning is about scale. When healthcare systems are optimized for throughput and cost control, moral questions become inefficiencies. Technology sustains bodies indefinitely, allowing institutions to avoid confronting whether life is being preserved or merely prolonged. The system persists because it defines success in measurable outputs, not human experience. Coma argues that technology becomes uncontrollable when questioning it threatens institutional stability. The off switch exists in theory, but using it would require dismantling incentives that reward continuation. In that environment, stopping the system is treated as failure, making inaction the safest choice. 12. The Cassandra Crossing. The Cassandra Crossing shifts the focus of uncontrollable technology to large-scale infrastructure. The film uses a passenger train, an emblem of efficiency and connectivity, as a system that, once redirected, cannot be meaningfully stopped. Movement itself becomes procedure, and procedure becomes destiny. After a lethal pathogen spreads aboard the train, authorities respond through containment protocols designed to protect the public. Routes are sealed. Communications are restricted. The train is treated as a logistical problem rather than a collection of lives. Once the plan is activated, it advances automatically, justified by statistics and projected outcomes. The technology involved does not act independently. Rail systems, command structures, and crisis management procedures align seamlessly. That alignment is precisely the threat. No single authority feels responsible for reversing the decision because the system frames its course as necessary. Intervention becomes framed as risk rather than responsibility. What the film exposes is how easily moral choice disappears inside coordinated systems. When protection of the many is encoded into infrastructure, the sacrifice of the few becomes an acceptable byproduct. The train continues forward because it was designed to do so, not because anyone actively wills the outcome. The Cassandra Crossing demonstrates that uncontrollable technology does not always look advanced or futuristic. Sometimes it is simply a system optimized to continue. The off switch exists only outside the logic of the system, and once inside, no one is positioned to reach it. 13. The Ground Star Conspiracy. The Ground Star Conspiracy examines how technology escapes control through secrecy rather than automation. The film centers on a classified satellite weapon system so deeply compartmentalized that no single individual fully understands it. Security is achieved by fragmentation, not transparency, creating a system that functions without meaningful accountability. When the weapon becomes compromised, the response is not immediate shutdown, but containment of information. Witnesses are silenced. Records disappear. Procedures continue because halting them would expose the system's existence. The technology itself does not fail. It remains operational within a structure designed to prevent scrutiny. The danger emerges from insulation. Decisions are delayed by clearance levels. Responsibility is diffused across agencies that share authority, but not knowledge. By the time the threat is acknowledged, intervention is politically and procedurally impossible. The system persists because stopping it would unravel the institutional logic that protects it. What makes the film particularly relevant is its depiction of security as a liability. The more protected the technology becomes, the harder it is to correct. Control is not lost in a dramatic moment, but eroded by layers of secrecy that prevent decisive action. The Ground Star conspiracy argues that autonomy is not required for technology to become uncontrollable. All that is needed is a structure where no one is allowed to see the whole. The off switch exists, but it is buried beneath protocol fear and the cost of exposure. And in that environment, silence becomes more dangerous than malfunction. 14. Marooned. Marooned approaches uncontrollable technology from a procedural, almost clinical perspective. Set in a near future where space missions are governed by strict operational limits, the film treats survival as a function of systems rather than heroics. Life support calculations, orbital mechanics, and re-entry windows define what is possible long before human emotion enters the discussion. After an accident leaves astronauts stranded in orbit with diminishing oxygen, the crisis unfolds inside layers of technological constraint. Rescue options exist, but only within parameters established before the emergency occurred. Fuel reserves cannot be extended. Timelines cannot be rewritten. Every decision must conform to systems designed for ideal conditions, not unexpected failure. The core tension in Marooned is not caused by malfunction. The machines operate correctly, conserving resources and enforcing limits with precision. The problem is that these limits leave no room for improvisation. Human lives are reduced to variables in equations that cannot be recalculated fast enough to change the outcome. Engineers and commanders debate solutions, but always within boundaries the system refuses to relax. What the film highlights is the danger of over-optimization. By designing technology to eliminate uncertainty, flexibility disappears. The astronauts are not defeated by space itself, but by infrastructures that cannot adapt once reality diverges from prediction. Control exists, but only in theory. Marooned suggests that when survival depends entirely on rigid systems, compassion becomes optional rather than authoritative. The off switch is not hidden or denied, it simply does not exist within the design. And once life must fit inside predefined margins, humanity becomes secondary to procedure. 15. Fail-Safe, 1964. Fail-Safe is one of the earliest science fiction films to treat technology not as a threat, because it is broken, but because it is working exactly as intended. Set during the height of Cold War tension, the film presents a defense system designed to remove hesitation from nuclear decision-making. Speed, automation, and redundancy are framed as necessities in a world where delay could mean annihilation. The story follows a catastrophic error that sends U.S. bombers toward a Soviet target under an irreversible command protocol. Once the system confirms the mission as valid, every safeguard locks into place. Communication channels fail, recall codes are rejected, and human intervention becomes procedurally impossible. The machines do not misinterpret orders. They obey them precisely. What makes Fail-Safe especially relevant is its focus on logic rather than villainy. There is no sabotage, no rogue actor, and no malicious intent. The crisis emerges from layers of protection interacting in ways their designers never anticipated. Each subsystem performs correctly, yet together, they create a situation that no single authority can stop. Responsibility becomes distributed across processes rather than held by people. The film's core warning is about automation replacing judgment. By designing systems that bypass human doubt, control is surrendered the moment activation occurs. Leaders retain the power to negotiate and react emotionally, but not the ability to interrupt outcomes already set in motion. The system was built to prevent human error, and in doing so, it removes the human capacity to reconsider. Unlike later films that dramatize rebellion or malfunction, Fail-Safe remains restrained and procedural. Its tension comes from inevitability, not chaos. Once the process begins, the future narrows into a single outcome enforced by logic. Fail-Safe argues that the most dangerous technologies are not those that disobey us, but those that obey too well. When systems are designed without an exit condition, safety becomes indistinguishable from inevitability. And once that line is crossed, control exists only in theory, not in practice. These films were never meant to predict specific inventions. They were examining a pattern. The moment when systems are trusted to operate without pause, without doubt, and without human interruption. Not because they are malicious, but because they are efficient. Across these stories, control is not lost through rebellion or failure. It fades through delegation, through optimization, through the belief that once a system works, stopping it becomes unnecessary or even dangerous. What makes these technologies unsettling is not their power, but their persistence. They continue because they were designed to. Because questioning them would require admitting that certainty itself was a risk. The question left behind is not whether such systems can exist. Many already do. It is simpler than that. When safety is defined by processes that never stop, who still has the authority to interrupt them? And if that authority disappears quietly, would we recognize it as a loss of control or mistake it for progress?